Good evening, everyone. My name is Stephen Donaghy. I'm a master's student with Royal Roads University, currently in DEM553, Disaster Response and Sustainable Recovery, with Dr. Chris Kearns. Coming to you today to talk about Standing in the Need, Culture, Comfort, and Coming Home After Katrina by Catherine Brown. I'd like to give a shout out to my team, Paul, Joe, and Dan. I'm looking forward to responding to your presentations in regards to the same book here, so it'll be quite interesting to engage and discuss further. So I'd like to do a land acknowledgement here. Currently have the privilege of living, working, and playing in the Tsleil-Waututh First Nation, the Musqueam First Nation, and the Squamish First Nation in North Vancouver, BC. So basically, we're going to start off with general thoughts, a sense of belonging, social bonds, systemic racism, and finally vulnerability in regards to standing in the need, and kind of going over these categories for the book here. We're going to start with general thoughts, and we'll kind of get into the meat and potatoes of the book and what I thought. So my general thoughts of the book. There's a whole heap of incredible information in this book and in this story surrounding this multi-generational family. Starting with ethnography, I personally hadn't had too much experience with this style of researching, but I found it quite incredible how Catherine Brown was able to really immerse herself in the family as they went through their trials and tribulations of dealing with the different systems and relocations and post-disaster efforts. It really shone a light on the different kind of challenges and positives that come with being forcefully moved from your home in the wake of a disaster and having to deal with the ramifications, and all of the systemic kind of biases and racism and stratification that come with it. It really shone a light on the resilience of a community by bonding together and really utilizing the inner strength of the community, even against the great odds of a disaster and the recovery of a disaster. Moving on, there was a very strong sense of belonging in the Bayou. The family was quite strong. I found that there was such an incredible sense of purpose and community in St. Bernard Parish. When you look at Buffy, who worked for the city, he was kind of in the minority, but he took such great pride in working for the city and serving the community, so much so that he stayed, in St. Bernard during and after Katrina at, great personal risk. But that is quite the testament to to that commitment to community and that sense of belonging. The sense of kind of the culture and identity that the families have in the Bayou. I think it gives them a great sense of identification and pride, which is quite a strong sense of belonging. Further to belonging, I think social bonds play a significant role in belonging. I find that the social bonds are what really create a community, and you could see that in the way that the families would, cook together, go to church, do community-based activities, whether it was in the park or coming together at different family houses and telling stories, exchanging recipes, and all of that good stuff. You could really kind of see the social bonds come through in kind of adverse conditions in Dallas with Connie and Katie that were using their social bonds as a sort of resilience. Whether it was cooking traditional meals or translating and kind of helping their family be fluid in the bureaucratic systems post Katrina. So systemic racism was really quite evident in, honestly, before Katrina, during Katrina, and after Katrina, and it was rife in this book. There's a lot of evidence pointing to, the floodplain geography of New Orleans and, the lower Ninth Ward, St. Bernard Parish, were predominantly vulnerable to flood risk before Hurricane Katrina. And a lot of that was based on race and social stratification. So there's quite a long history of systemic racism, obviously, in the South of the United States, but particularly in New Orleans. It really shone through in this case, basically when the family was making their way back to Katrina and trying to navigate FEMA systems and kind of dealing with public services and housing applications, insurance companies, and that sort of thing. There was really a gap of understanding from the family in that community, and just that culture in general. It was a bit of a culture clash of dealing with bureaucracy when they're so used to kind of helping each other out in person. It was quite difficult to phone these organizations and be on hold for hours and trying to navigate that. So you could really see that blockade from bureaucracy and these sort of institutions that just aren't set up to acknowledge, cultural diversity, essentially. Not to mention the lack of engagement or outreach from these institutions to really connect with the families from the bayou. And this ultimately ends up in vulnerability. So again, the history, the floodplain geography, the history of plantations in New Orleans, all very long-seated systemic racism played a huge role in the vulnerability of the lower Ninth Ward and St. Bernard Parish. Just the lack of understanding of government institutions and local governments post Hurricane Katrina. When the family was incrementally moving back to St. Bernard Parish, there was quite a significant, it was hurdle after hurdle of, trailer applications and not being in the right trailer and just endless bureaucratic, dead ends. And it was only with the intervention of bureaucratic literacy from friends and family that they were able to really navigate these systems. But the family that was returning to Katrina, it was quite evident that they were significantly vulnerable, and they weren't returning to the same home that they had imagined, and they were vulnerable prior to Hurricane Katrina, and when they returned home, they were increasingly vulnerable. So, in terms of vulnerability, we'll look at the losses that the St. Bernard's Parish and the families surrounding that endured. So, obviously, in an event like a hurricane, there's going to be significant physical infrastructure losses. When you look closer into that, you're going to look at the personal material values that people lost, whether it was their assets, their personal belongings that were in their homes, their jobs, their vehicles, all of these materials, all of these things that kind of keep their lives together, are essentially eradicated, and that has a significant emotional toll. Basically starting from scratch when you return. The non-material losses would be, a sense of place. returning to Saint Bernard Parish after being removed for a year, you really got the sense that they were returning to a shell of their former home. A lot of the community infrastructure wasn't operational, or was in poor repair, and that kind of leads to a loss of identity. The culture that was once there simply doesn't exist anymore, or it's a shell of its former self. So there's a real loss of integrity and identity after the event. I found that the culture adapted significantly well to the adversity of the event, whether it was relocating to Dallas or returning to St. Bernard. I felt that Connie and Katie did an incredible job of staying positive and leaning on each other to support their family as best they could. Whether it was making homemade recipes for their family, housing their family, or trying to navigate these systems with some form of bureaucratic literacy, which was significantly helpful in those difficult times. But really adapting their setting to their culture, I'd say would be the best way to put it. So, to conclude, I think Catherine Brown did an incredible job of painting a very vibrant picture of how a family survives in great adversity. It was very eye-opening to see the innocence of a very independent community being put through incredible circumstances, not only from surviving a deadly disaster, but also having to live through the recovery of that disaster and having to navigate systems that aren't necessarily fluent in your language, or interested in engaging with you. It really illustrated the limitations of a prescribed recovery from an institutionalized perspective, and how it can really not only miss the mark but exacerbate situations from extremely vulnerable populations that are returning to their communities. And without that engagement, it really shows how it can worsen the situation of those communities that just want to return to their homes and reestablish those roots. It really drives home that people are always the first priority in these situations, and that engagement needs to be done on a grassroots, frontline level to really be successful in recovering effectively. And I think that's one of my biggest takeaways is really bringing it back down to that ground level and communicating and finding out what people's needs are instead of telling them what they are. So that's basically it. On my next page, I have my references, and I look forward to responding to the rest of my team. Thanks a lot for watching.